reminders such as the bank circulations that he had sent. So definitely we are seeing a lot more enhanced approachments from the governor, and we do expect him to be at least more reactive towards the needs, and also portend what is set to happen in the future based on, for example, the upcoming Fed and Bank of England rate hikes.
All right. Thank you very, very much for this conversation. This has been very insightful. We're just talking to Steve Biko, Gibran Qureshi, and Kevin Titoek, talking about the decision by the central bank not to increase the CBR rate. Joy, what have we learned?
Core inflation and things like that, very complicated economic terms, but yes, I did learn quite a lot, and I think it's very important for people to understand how this affects them on the ordinary level, you know, cost of credit, just like Steve Biko mentioned. So yeah, very healthy conversation. Thank you so much, Adelaide, and to Steve and Gibran as well as Kevin. It's always an honor having you put this into perspective for us. Well, let's take a look at other stories making headlines in the business world. And the National Construction Authority has started to draft a policy blueprint that will establish a one-stop shop for pre-construction regulatory needs by property developers, architects and surveyors. The move is expected to reduce the bureaucracy in the construction sector that forces stakeholders to have to separate engagements with the National Environmental Management Authority, county governments and Ministry of Lands before starting construction, a fact that experts say is a key impediment towards growth of the sector. The Construction Authority will also work towards reducing fees charged by various authorities and regulatory bodies before and during property development in a bid to spur growth in the sector. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, construction is one of the fastest growing sectors in the economy and expanded by 11% in the first quarter of this year, buoyed by increased activity in real estate and infrastructure. And let's now move on to more news. In China's Southern Airlines has started
the construction sector, and it is very true that there's been a bit of hue and cry that you need so many permits. You need an EMA permit, you need the compliance certificate from the National Construction Authority, you need the approvals from the county governments. And so what we are working on trying to foster right now is a situation where you'd have a one-stop shop, where you have one center that you'd pay the fees for National Construction Authority, you'd do the NEMA, you do the county government, and then from there they can distribute the resources amongst the different entities. But that will help a lot in terms of investment within the country, because you're reducing the red tape. You know, it's very discouraging if you find that you have to go to like 10 different offices. So that is definitely one of the things our board, which has been inaugurated today, is going to take up.
And I hope within the next 3 months, Bwana Chairman, you'll give me a proposal that I will take to Cabinet on how you are planning to reduce the fees. Because we want investors in the construction sector to be facilitated effectively to arrive here and pay nominal facilitative fees. We did not form the National Construction Authority so that we make money. At any rate, the National Treasury and the Exchequer is ready to provide support to agencies that we run as government, so that your role really is regulatory, supervisory, facilitative to the sector as we move forward. We hope that other agencies are going to do this, agencies that we have to deal with in the construction sector like NEMA and the others. We reduce the fees. The message I'm giving you today is this: we must spur growth in this sector, and one way of doing that is I need a proposal from you on how we are reducing the fees.
China's Southern Airlines has started the first of 3 weekly flights from Guangzhou to Nairobi. The airline will operate the 3 flights by itself, but has signed a code-sharing partnership with Kenya Airways that could further boost the frequency between the 2 destinations. Under the agreement, both airlines will offer 20 weekly flights on the route, making it convenient for transit passengers from African routes to destinations in Australia, East and Southern Asia, as well as more destinations within China. The move by the airline to fly the route is part of the bilateral trade between the Kenya and China governments following President Uhuru Kenyatta's state visit in 2013. Kenya has over the years strengthened its trade ties with China, especially in providing the much-needed financing and construction for large infrastructure projects. Kenya traders have also shown interest in traveling to China to buy goods to be sold in the country. Kenya Airways has been expanding the Far East and Middle East driven by demand from business travelers. And this year, KQ opened a sales and ticketing outlet at the Tea Room area in the Central Business District, targeting thousands of small traders who buy goods in the Middle East and Asia.
Last week, we announced our financial results for the year ended 31 March 2015. As you all know, the airline posted a loss as a result of multiple challenges we have faced in recent times. This has raised concerns about the airline, both locally and internationally, from the extensive coverage following the announcement. Our priority at the moment as management and the board is to put the airline back on a sound financial footing. We have embarked on several measures to realign our business strategy with the emerging realities in the environment we operate in, and thus ensure that we regain our altitude as an airline with the support of all our stakeholders. I want to confirm that our key stakeholders and shareholders are fully involved in this process.
Innovation and entrepreneurship have emerged as keys to unlocking Kenya's economic growth, but lack of an organized system and limited access to financial services by young innovators has been hindering the growth. Riding on the momentum of the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, the government now seeks to create a national innovation ecosystem around Enterprise Kenya to support innovation in the country. The newly launched incubation program by Nairobi University will give 10 startups between $3,000 to $5,000 to grow their businesses. The incubators will be connected to mentors and potential investors, with the best performing startup getting a capital injection of $100,000. Stakeholders called for a more organized body to ensure all innovations are tapped, incubated and commercialized to create jobs for the more than 40% unemployed Kenyans. All right, and I think we're now going to cross over to Nigeria, where women farmers are doing incredible things. In rural Nigeria, 80% of small-scale farmers are women. Yet very few women own land held by a lack of resources and conservative male attitudes. Now, activists are calling for more rights for women farmers to give them access to land, credit and political power.
Susan Godwin has been a small-scale farmer for 10 years in Nasarawa State in Nigeria. But it hasn't been easy. The major problem has been acquiring her own land.
We don't own land as a woman, we don't own. And when you hire, you may not get up to a large number of, you may not get up to a large land that you want to use.
And Susan isn't alone. Tradition and culture often puts women at a disadvantage in Nigeria's rural communities.
Traditionally, a woman is a person who's coming from a different family for the purpose of marriage, and therefore she can only be given land by her father or husband. She does not have any right based on tradition to go and buy land for herself.
Most small-scale female farmers who don't inherit land from their fathers or husbands end up hiring land from their male counterparts. But this generates another problem. Men often come back to collect the land if the female farmer hasn't been successful.
So when you rent, maybe you rent for 5 years or 3 years. After negotiation, you say, okay, let me go and bring something and apply on the farm so that it can be more fertile for me to farm. After applying, maybe for 1 year you farm, the second year the man may decide to say, leave my farm. Take the remaining of your money, I don't want you here again, I want to work on that land.
The recent fall in oil prices has forced the country to diversify its economy and invest more in agriculture. That means empowering women who produce over 60% of Nigeria's food. NGOs like Oxfam want to revise the Land Use Act of 1978. Under the Act, the government holds the land on behalf of the public in trust. It's a practice that doesn't favour women.
at the moment, there's still disadvantage due to some of those cultural practices, that is still persistent, because until she's able to buy, then she does not have a land, and some of those stumbling blocks, some of those challenges needs to be addressed, if women are really to own land. So traditional customary issues as well as policy issues needs to be addressed. So the Land Use Act itself probably needs some kind of revision.
Despite the challenges faced, Susan Godwin is not ready to give up.
So let me continue pushing. Maybe one day, sometimes, things may get to change.
Nigeria has the capacity to become an agricultural powerhouse in Africa, but it first needs reform, revising the Land Use Act to make specific provisions for women, helping Susan and Nigeria's economy to thrive.
All right, South Africa has seen a rapid rise in craft beers as drinkers look for alternatives to the well-established big names such as Castle and Carling Black Label. Now, the country's first black-owned artisanal brewery is making waves in the game, targeting the aspiring black middle class.
Soweto Gold, named after the iconic South African township, was brewed in a 5-litre tub in Ndumiso Madlala's kitchen. Now, with its brewery Ubuntu Kraal just blocks from where Nobel laureates Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu once lived, the lager has become a hit with local craft beer enthusiasts.
When we looked around for a place to put a brewery, there was no better place than Soweto. So if you look at the microbrewing industry in South Africa, it was growing mostly in white suburbs. And if you look at the fan base of beer sits mostly in the townships. So we thought it would be quite a good idea to open a microbrewery in the township.
Madlala hopes the brand and its location will help attract black South Africans to the exploding craft beer market. Over 120 breweries have sprung up across the country, and each weekend, thousands flock to the now dozens of festivals offering a full range of hoppy goodness.
We were very behind the rest of the world, where now we're actually almost on par. We're growing just as fast as everyone else, which is awesome. There's ales, there's Weiss, there's dark ales, there's more stouts, there's so much variety and new labels and new tastes and new flavors.
A government grant helped Madlala get his brewery off the ground, and after just 1 year, they're already breaking even. But much more expensive than a commercial lager, Soweto Gold is still sold almost exclusively in Johannesburg's affluent and largely white suburbs.
We rely on big margins, so our products are priced far higher than mainstream beers. So to actually play in the mainstream field is actually not our business model. We are not SAP's competition, so we're just playing in that niche, high LSM craft market.
Still, Madlala has plans. Up next, a German-style Weiss beer, more local hires, and eventually to see Soweto Gold poured from the suburbs to the townships.
All right, now, the last decade has seen demand for services from Africa rise worldwide. But who thought that speakers from Africa would be on high demand today when just 20 years ago the globe thought Africa was just a continent filled with negative energy? Well, thanks to the exposure of many and access to the internet, Africa now holds a much respected position than it did before, and that is why speaking bureaus targeting African talent are coming up. Among them, the African Speakers and Artists, headed by George Isses, with a mission to become East Africa's leading speaker and artist bureau by representing the region's standout talent, drawn from ranks of entertainers, artists and business speakers across a range of industries and disciplines. And so he's here to enlighten us more. Are you a speaker, a moderator or an entertainer or a performer? You might be the person who would like to listen to this conversation, or even somebody who would like to get into the same speaking bureaus in this case. Thank you so much for joining us, George.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you in studio, actually, because I think Kenya is a very vibrant country. The East African region is very vibrant as well. Tell me about African Speakers and Artists. How long has it been in existence?
Not very long. We launched this year, we are really the first conference speaker bureau and talent booking agency in East Africa. So in essence, we are the leading
Yes.
speaker bureau in Africa.
Mhm.
And yeah, we spent probably the last year in trying to find the most inspirational, successful, creative people that we can, and to wrap them up and give them a platform for international companies to be able to find them, access them, and book them for their events. And we've done the same with entertainers and artists.
All right. Which are some of the names that you've signed up onto?
Well,
African
with some
speakers?
well-known names. So, for example, technology, as you'd expect, is a very active category for us.
Yes.
With very accomplished speakers like Eric Hersman and Juliana Rotich, who I'm sure are very well known to your viewers.
From Ushahidi.
From Ushahidi and iHub.
Right.
And some up-and-coming stars, frankly, on the speaker circuit. People like Mark Kaigwa, who, you know, in his early 20s was one of the most influential bloggers in Africa.
Right.
No mean feat, you know, for a 20-year-old.
Mhm.
And Tony Ndungu, who's created an amazing education-based app called Kitabu, which is in fact recently supported by John Kerry. So we have a wealth of talent here, and it actually makes my job very easy.
Right. And that's just for technology. And, you know, do you have mentors, people in the mentoring capacity?
I mean, there are people that we represent that mentor, but it's not a service that our company would offer. But yeah, we certainly have people on our roster who do that. For example, well-known businessmen like Ali Mufuruki, for example, from Tanzania, probably better known in Tanzania. But he's a very successful businessman, and you know he does mentor people.
Right. You've also mentioned Ashish Thakkar as well.
Yeah.
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 And do you hope that probably one of these days we're also going to have him here as well, talk about how much he has mentored younger people?
I hope so. I hope so. He has a foundation called the Mara Foundation, and in fact, the fees he earns from his speaking engagements, he donates to his foundation, and as part of that foundation, there are a lot of people that have benefited, and it's something that I know he loves to talk about. So I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we do see him here evangelizing about this amazing foundation that he started.
All right. So how would you evaluate the talent in East Africa and Africa as a whole?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think East Africa has been really overlooked, frankly, and I'm trying to give the personalities that we have here the credit that they deserve. There are speaker bureaus that exist in South Africa, but they represent almost exclusively South Africans. You know, don't forget that East Africa is a part of the world that has given us an Oscar winner in Lupita in 2014. Time magazine, which is a very influential magazine, of course, had 2 Kenyans in the most influential list in 2014. So to put it into perspective, the United Kingdom had 1 person, and they were Benyavanga Wainana, you know, who's probably the best writer of his generation, and Orio Okolo, who's an investor with the Omidyar Network and a political activist.
Right.
So, you know, we've had Tour de France winners, if you want to call Chris Froome a Kenyan. Yeah, I think it's, you know, there's a lot of talent here, and I use the word talent to describe both the speakers and artists.
Right, and so you chose Kenya specifically for that?
Kenya's our base, but as you know, Ashish Thakkar is Ugandan.
Yes.
We have an amazing woman in Ethiopia called Bethlehem Alemu, the founder of Soul Rebel Shoes. So our roster is from across the EAC, but our office is in Nairobi.
All right. Well, how do you match the African talent at this point with the international talent that we have? I know you've mentioned all these big names. You know, Lupita is from Kenya. But when you look at our talent on the speaking levels, how would you equate us to the international speakers per se?
You know, I think that whilst international speakers, you know, who probably do it a bit more regularly, might be a little bit more polished, and they might have snazzier presentations. I think that the stories that people have to share from East Africa are much richer, and I think are going to be really in demand.
Right.
And you don't necessarily need to be super slick when you're presenting. And I'll give you the example of Richard Torere. I don't know if you've come across him, but he was a young Maasai boy who invented the line lights system to scare away lions from their bomas, from Maasai bomas. And he was invited to talk at TED. You know, he was 13 years old. He was obviously nervous on stage. He obviously fluffed a couple of his lines, but he really endeared himself to the audience. You know, and you could tell people really getting behind him, and he got a standing ovation at the end. So people will forgive you for being a human being and for, you know, not getting everything completely right. But it's really the story that people want to hear that engages people the most.
And so we as Africans have so many stories to tell, but we rarely have the platforms to tell them at. And how are you as African speakers going to make sure, or at least to try and make sure, that our stories are told even better? Because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding on the global platform as to what exactly Africa is.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we're living and breathing the progress and the development here on the ground, but as you say, the rest of the world, and big companies in particular who are our target market, they're a slow-moving ship. You know, they're a little bit behind the curve with their perception of what's happening, and I'm trying to rectify that.
Right.
So my old life was working for a big global events company in London, and I was a sales director, so I had a lot of interaction with big brands. And what I'm trying to do is to tap into that network and to create a sort of matchmaking service between, you know, our talent and that international client network to try and get the message out around the world.
Right. So with your experience in the event management industry, what makes a good speaker? What makes a good entertainer? What makes a good moderator? What makes a good performer?
You need to, I think you need to have your own voice and your own point of view. Ali Mufariki is a great example. You know, the whole world is getting behind this narrative of Africa rising.
Yes.
He's challenged that, and he's flipped it on his head. And he asks the question, is Africa really rising?
Yes.
And he now owns that conversation, he owns that dialogue. So I think if you have a unique point of view, and over the course of a 20 to 25-minute speech, if you have one key message that you want to get across, that's the main thing. And then you have some supporting messages that will go in around that.
All right.
But there has to be a big idea.
Do you think that maybe half the time people out there misunderstand the real story on the African continent, and yet you know, what they perceive is not exactly what's on the ground?
Yeah, but I think that that they're aware of that and they're trying to change that. And I'll give you an example. If a big company had approached us 3 or 4 years ago to produce an event for, let's say, their leadership team in London, and they'll have a segment in the afternoon session of day 2, which would be, you know, understanding sub-Saharan Africa, right? They would probably then have got an economist from a bank or a professor from a university to talk about it, but it's all very theoretical. You know?
Right.
Now they want to hear from real people on the ground with real stories to share, and I think that there's an appetite for that, which is why I think there'll be a lot of interest in the, you know, in the people that we represent.
All right. For someone who would like to become a part of the African Speakers and Artists Bureau or agency, how do they need to go about that?
Well, we definitely want to hear from people that think they have a, you know, a story to tell. The question that you need to ask is, will a big company be interested in that story? Because essentially we work backwards from what our clients want. But absolutely, we'd love to hear from anybody who, you know, who thinks that they should be part of the roster. You know, the first part of signing people up was us being proactive and going to the market. But now that we've launched and now that we're fully operational, we would definitely like to hear from people out there, so get in touch.
But I'm thinking that there's specific people that you're looking for. It's not just anybody that you're going to sign up to African speakers and artists. So I'm sure there's a little bit of some guidelines that you're looking at, because maybe later today after this interview, you're going to be receiving all sorts of phone calls at your agency saying, you know, I watched your interview on TV, and so I think I can be a good moderator. Yet that is not exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's the relevance of the content of their speech and their ability to deliver that speech, and a little bit of a track record of them giving that presentation and giving that speech, because that shows us that there's demand in what that person has to say. And very exceptionally, you might get people that haven't had that demand, but, you know, I'll be able to spot, hopefully, that there's potential. All
right. According to your site, you're saying that the people that you're looking for are people to speak at conferences, after dinner speakers as well. You're looking for artists, entertainers for events, festivals, ceremonies, concerts, personal appearances as well. Hospitality, award show, emceeing, and hosting. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, the briefs from clients can be anything, really. So we want to have as balanced a portfolio as possible, so that we'll be able to service any brief from any client anywhere in the world, depending on their fees, depending on their time frames and people's availability, which is often a problem. So, yeah, I think the key thing for us is to have a real mix of people, you know, experienced and up and coming, expensive and less expensive, so that we can meet any client brief that comes along.
Have you experienced any challenges so far in trying to get these personalities?
No, actually. The first thing I did was draw up a list, a long list of people, and names just really kind of came to me very quickly. So that process actually wasn't that difficult.
It was so easy.
Yeah.
All right, and looking at the future, what are your dreams? At the end of it all, where do you want to see East Africa in this industry, per se?
I think I'm trying to just shine the spotlight on this region. Obama helped.
He did.
That was a big step for us.
Right.
And to hear him name drop M-Pesa, M-Kopo, Shahidi, was a really big deal. And he's added to the buzz that's been generated by some of those tech innovations. So I want that to carry on, and I want to get the next generation of M-Pesa, find those people, and to get their story out to the world. And the media helps. KTN or international networks like the BBC and CNN, they really do shine a spotlight on some of the emerging stories from this region. So that's been a big deal.
All right.
Yeah.
And of course, the people who would like to get in touch, the people who would like to say, listen, I think I can do this, I think I can do the other, I think this is the category I fit in best. How do they go about that?
Just get in touch. The contact details are on our website. We'd love to hear from you. And tell us a bit about yourselves. If you've got video links or anything, information about your speaking ability, please share it. And we'll be in touch. We'll get back in touch with everybody that contacts us.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
No. I think that's it.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Thanks for having me.
time.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
And wish you all the best. This could be something that could turn your life around. So don't be very slow actually about this. And George Isaias is the founder, CEO for African Speakers and Artists. And he's got a wealth of experience when it comes to event management. He's been doing this for quite some time. And he's Kenyan, by the way, just in case you needed to know. And there's a lot of demand globally for African speakers. And so if you feel that you can do this, you need to get in touch with him through the site as well. Tell them what you can do and how much of this you think can be generating even better income for you. So it's not just about speaking, but it's also about you being able to represent a story and tell Africa's story even better to the entire world. Now it's time for us to look at the markets, and we have Steve Biko in studio, but also in town is Joshua Otiende as well. So we're going to be looking at that quite very shortly. In fact, if I take a look at how the markets did perform today, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
All right. What do you make of the performance of the markets today?
Well, we are seeing a red effect all through. We're seeing figures going down, the NASI, the NSE 20, turnover as well as volume. This is basically an indicator of investors leaving the market. We know our market is usually foreign dominated, and we've seen a huge exit from emerging markets like Kenya as well as China into the States, where the Fed was expected to raise their interest rates this year, making that market more attractive than, say, for example, Kenya.
All right. And if you look at, well, the markets closed at about 3:15 today, and the biggest gainers, we're having Equity Bank that was selling a share at 42 shillings and 50 cents. They've moved up 8.28%. What could be contributing to this good performance for Equity Bank?
With equity, I see two scenarios, basically speculation as well as a growth potential. Speculation in the sense that they're going to announce their results within this month. And in terms of growth, we've seen a lot of activity happening from equity. They recently bought the 7th largest bank in Democratic Republic of Congo, and now the rollout of the Equitel platform is also taking shape. So we'll see a lot of growth in that area as well as speculation on the stock in the coming weeks.
Right. On this side of the studio, we have Steve Biko as well, who is a financial analyst. On Twitter, he is at So-Called Analyst. Steve, the markets today do you think they were predictable as compared to what you said yesterday?
I think yes. The other thing is when you're looking at what's moving equity, for example, because we've seen Helios actually sold its entire stake from it and sold it to an SSF. So this is one of the contributing aspects why equity is actually performing the way it is. And also, beyond the speculative or human sentiment, the element of what's happening in the telco sector, Equitel, the fact that Safaricom finally is actually people are trying to speculate that Safaricom will actually be able to get a competitor, and we've seen now that with Equitel being discussed a lot, it's actually having a negative impact on Safaricom, because we know that our market is actually driven by more or less emotional sentiment than technical aspect. But also we need to understand the foreign participation is actually very high. As of yesterday, we're looking at in terms of supply, we're looking at 54%, in terms of demand at 89%. So it's interesting actually how suddenly foreign investors are actually coming back, taking positions, key positions, because the market is actually highly discounted, and this is a very interesting thing, because the unfortunate thing is every time we have a bear brand, local investors pull out, foreign investors come in, and this is because, one, they have a privy to information, they're able to understand how the market is moving, and so yes, the market is actually going as predicted. The bear market probably run for another month as more counters actually take co-positions.
All right, Joshua, when you look at the biggest movers of the day, Safaricom still leads with, they've moved a volume of 30.58 million shares, and equity as well is one of the biggest movers. They've moved 6.28 million shares. What's your assessment of that?
Like Biko has just mentioned, I think investors are taking positions. The market is seriously discounted, as he mentioned, and I think they're looking at a situation where buying at a low price and exiting at a very high price is a potential going forward. So I think the large discount is usually, and it will usually encourage foreigners or major investors to come into the market, which is what I'm seeing with a position being taken up with Safaricom equity and the large volume movers.
All right, and this question is going to the both of you, Joshua and Steve. You know, the central bank says that they're meant to auction the 2-year treasury bond this month. What's your view on that?
There's been less interest, less activity in the bond market. There's too much tightness, there's too much regulation. Liquidity is an issue, and traders, investors are actually looking at dealing with cash rather than going to the into the bond market. The unfortunate thing is mostly when cash outflows from the equity normally goes into the bond market. But we've seen the challenge the Kenya shilling is facing both locally and internationally. Most investors are actually looking at either holding on to cash and taking new positions into the equity market, or looking for other alternative means in terms of investment, because the returns on the bond market actually being washed away, not only the challenges the shilling is facing, but also in terms of inflation.
All right, and Joshua, what do you think?
Yeah, liquidity is an issue, and I think the central bank efforts to kind of stem the shilling is kind of affecting the market. We're seeing a tightening of liquidity, and for example, they maintained the CBR rate at 11.5. This will still see volatility in the market, and that will definitely affect the bond market.
All right, and there's also been talk about slower pace on banking consolidation. Is this helpful to the Kenyan, in trying to cushion the Kenyan shilling?
I think banking consolidation, it's something that not everyone has really taken up to it. I think for me, the shilling needs a different approach. For us, we need to look at our current account deficit is too high, and this goes beyond trying to, central bank come into the market to be able to play with liquidity, sell dollars to the banks and everything, because even our forex reserves are actually going down. For me, I think we need to take a different approach. I mean, if I'm going to look at it from the ordinary point of view as an ordinary citizen, then I need to look at the elements of access to credit, the element of import-export aspect, manufacturing, agriculture, and I keep repeating these things because at the end of the day, Kenyans, we are vast numbers, but I'd like to throw a challenge out there to CBK, to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, to National Treasury, to give us numbers per sector, vis-a-vis the gross domestic product, in terms of how many jobs are created, how many jobs do we lose, how many factories were set up, how many factories shut down, and what was the effect on this directly to the shilling, directly to inflation, directly to performance at the end of the day in terms of growth, in terms of projection. And going forward, when you're looking at the banking sector and how it's performing, there's an onslaught from the telco. sector in terms of mobile money and how it's changing how we do banking, the element of customer care, digitization of customer service and the likes. And for me, as central bank, I like what the CBK governor has done today. You know, taking a firm stand against national treasury, and this is the kind of governor we want. This is what CBK needs to be actually be doing as per the Central Bank Act going forward. And I think when you look at the performance of the NSE vis-a-vis in terms of equities and performance of the money market and the bond market, there's a correlation to how we're managing the shilling, there's a correlation to how we're looking at the investor confidence, and there's a correlation, you know, when you raise the core capital from 1 billion to 5 billion. I mean, even entrepreneurs get discouraged and look for better markets to be able to operate there. And this actually works against us in the long term.
All right. Joshua, do you agree we need to take a different approach?
I look at it in a different way. For example, we've seen the tightening of liquidity to strengthen the shilling have an effect on market fundamentals. And I think this is a balancing act that CBK is looking at. We've seen a situation where they mentioned that they're maintaining the CBR rate at 11.5. But if you look at the interbank rates, they've gone up above the 11.5 figure. We're seeing rates as high as 17%. This has basically tightened liquidity and made credit very expensive. That supports the argument is put across about the monetary environment in the country. But again, in terms of maintaining a stable financial situation, I think the CBK is doing enough. But the only area I'd want them to look at more keenly is the current account deficit, which the government has attributed to a huge capital good imports, for example, for infrastructure projects. But again, like you mentioned, we need to look at the sectors in an individual basis and understand the production level as well as the money we are gaining from these sectors.
And so you think that would be able to help know where the problem is?
Yeah, I think this will be able to kind of control the current account deficit, which is actually affecting our monetary indicators as well as our shilling performance.
All right. Steve, when you look at the core capital issue, you know, from 1 billion to 5 billion shillings, what is your take on that?
I think one, in as much as I'm tempted to support what the government wants to do in terms of being able to cushion banks against shocks, both local and international, I think it's a bit it works against the sector first and foremost, and will actually lead to market dominance. We have 6 core banks controlling almost 75%. And if you raise this to 5 billion, these 6 core banks will actually be able to get this very easily. And this means basically that other local banks will actually go out. And I think given the diversity as a frontier market, we are not yet an emerging market, we are a frontier market. Given the diversity of this, and given the diversity of the entrepreneurs we have, different banks offer different needs to different people. And for me, I think central bank has, I agree with central bank. Raising the core capital is wrong. I think the model being used to look at how banks need to be aligned in terms of core capital is actually off. And I think what we need to do is let central bank manage banks better according to the Central Bank Act. And 1 billion is enough to be able to cushion. And this brings in the relevance of the insurance sector. What is it playing in terms of business in the country, in terms of insuring banks against shocks? And you've seen the poor performance of the insurance sector. So for me, I like to look at the bigger picture as compared to being able to look at what central bank does. And for me, I'm thinking one of the biggest challenge for banks has been, for them, they've not been able to finance core capital projects. Like we're looking at core infrastructure projects in the country, we're saying we're able to borrow money outside. And I'm thinking we need to change that. We need to, local banks are able to finance this. But why are they not able to? One is because of too much regulation in the market. So you have a lot of money just sitting somewhere waiting for that wrong day for them to be able to cushion myself. I think we need to, Kenya is still a young market. We are frontier. I don't know why people keep saying we're emerging. We're a frontier market, which means we've got a huge room to grow. So I think banks need to be led to grow so we can be able to finance, take higher risks, finance entrepreneurs from every sector, and then as we grow then be able to look at capitalization, look at what laws and reforms we need. And for me, I think we need core reforms in overall in the finance sector.
All right. And Joshua, let me come to you as we wind up. What do you think is going to be happening tomorrow? Are we going to see any changes whatsoever when it comes to the performance of the Kenyan shilling?
With the Kenya shilling, we just see the maintenance of the CBR rate being an indicator that the CBK wants us to kind of absorb the initial steps that they had taken to stabilize the shilling. So I think the shilling will still remain under volatility, but at least it will be a bit stable. So as this information sinks into the market, we'll see a reaction of the shilling. But going forward, we are seeing a strengthening of the dollar internationally, as well as a widening of current account deficit being major areas of volatility for the shilling. The balancing act here for CBK is to maintain a sound economic environment as well as to strengthen the shilling. So for example, we've seen them being able to maintain inflation around the government regulatory range. So I think they're still doing a good job, but we're yet to see the effects of the CBR rates going into the markets.
All right. Steve?
I'm keen to look at the interest in terms of equities, foreign participation, especially in terms of inflow, cash capital. And also for me, I think, as I've said before, central bank has done what it can. So for me, there will continue being a lot of pressure on the shilling. We've seen the dollar doing its best in terms of the last 8 years. So our current account deficit keeps widening, import-export ratio keep widening. And as long as we keep ignoring the challenges manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, the service sector is actually facing, then we will not be able to address the issues that are actually facing the shilling. So going forward, there will continue being pressure. To continue playing between 99, 101, thereabout, and then also the element of our debt will also add more pressure on it in terms of us being able to meet our obligation in terms of paying our debt. And basically the performance of the stock, the bond market is not so well, which ultimately affects how investors are looking.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve and Joshua Otiende as well, joining us from our City Center studio. Thank you both for joining us for our markets analysis, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you all for watching, and remember, you can give us your feedback at KTN News or using the hashtag BusinessToday. My Twitter handle at JoyDorinBira as well. We'll be able to review some of those views of yours. For now, it's bye for us. And see you again tomorrow, same time for Business Today. Coming up next is Swahili News with Ali Manzu, so don't go too far. Thank you for coming.